Hey friends, welcome to another episode of the podcast. Today we're jumping in on a conversation wrapping up Luke chapter 7, which I think is going to hopefully be encouraging to you to continue having your conversations throughout this week, be it around a dinner table or in a car with a small group. We really hope that these conversations land you in greater community. So realize that you're probably listening by yourself, but our hope is that it would push you toward conversation with others. So praying that it would. Today I've got Chris McLeod with me. Chris, thanks for joining.
My pleasure.
Chris is going to be asking some questions based on the text and sermon from Sunday. Chris is our director of youth ministry, and I always get those titles slightly wrong when I say them. And I did with Elnay as well last week. So all things youth, all of the weekly and yearly youth ministry, Chris is in charge of and does a great job with our teens. So thanks for jumping out of that for a minute and into this. And you've got some questions for us. So
yeah.
Luke 7, if you want, pause, reread it, pull it up on your phone, or open a Bible if you need a recap. But the end of Luke 7, verse 36 through to 50, verse 50, is this story about Jesus being anointed by, in what most Bibles call a sinful woman. And it's this intriguing interaction between Jesus, this woman, and a Pharisee named Simon, whose house they're all at. So then we're going to get into some of that with these questions. But why don't we jump in and get going?
Awesome.
Yeah.
So first question, why do you think the woman's act of love, so her radical hospitality towards Jesus, why was that so powerful to him, especially when we compare that to Simon's reserved hospitality?
Mm-hmm. So I think for two reasons. The first is practical. We talked a little bit about this on Sunday, which is that the lady who comes and offers this radical hospitality to Jesus is actually taking on the role of host that should have fell to Simon. So I think the first reason why it is why we call it radical hospitality, the first reason why it is so significant to Jesus, I think Jesus actually explains later on in the text, right? So later on he says to Simon, I came into your home and you didn't offer me water for my feet. You didn't greet me with a kiss. You didn't offer to anoint my head with oil. Those are the three main responsibilities of a host in Jesus's day. So in any situation, if you are the host, if people are to your house, if you've invited them, if you're hosting a meal, if you have people, you were expected to be the one to offer those three things as the host. It was your duty. It was your responsibility. And so I think Jesus arrives. We don't know this from the beginning, but we find it out later in Jesus' own words that Simon didn't do those things, which would have been a social misstep for him as a religious leader, as a Pharisee, as a person, one who's hosting Jesus. Whether or not he offered those things to the other guests, we don't know. We find out later that there are these other guests there. And, they don't really factor into the story other than we're told they're there. So whether they received all of those things from Simon as host and then he didn't offer it specifically to Jesus, we can't say, or whether Simon is just not a great, quote, great host.
Yeah.
So I think the first reason is that, Simon didn't offer these acts of welcome and embrace to Jesus when Jesus arrives. The woman enters the house, which again we talked about not being tremendously awkward in and of itself, that people would come and go, and that it wasn't just Simon the Pharisee and Jesus. There's a group of people there, so you assume people coming and going a little bit. But the lady arrives. Luke tells us she's a sinful woman. He makes sure we know from the beginning that that's how she's perceived. And then Simon himself kind of reiterates that in his own words. So she not only, and this is why I think it is in part why it's significant, she not only takes on the exact precise role of host, but she does it to like a lavish, over generous, almost like incredible way. So it's not like she shows up and thinks to herself, oh, Simon didn't welcome this dude into his house, I'm going to, just do this. I'm going to get a bucket of water and offer it to Jesus to wash his feet, dusty roads, sandals, long trips, all of it walking pretty well. I'm not going to offer him Simon's oil to anoint his head and kind of refresh himself. I'm not going to greet him with a kiss into Simon's house. It's this lavish, generous, overly so. She washes his feet with her tears and wipes them with her hair. She kisses his feet and then anoints. It says she anoints Jesus with oil out of an alabaster jar that she's brought. And so that's not and if you look this up, there's like a general consensus on what this would have been, but I don't think, exact precise measurements of like this oil in an alabaster jar, though. Some people would suggest it's like this could even be like a year's wage.
Yeah.
And so it's like probably a family heirloom almost that would have been kept. It is overly generous. It is in some people's minds, maybe in many people's minds, like a waste of that kind of thing to use that to wash Jesus or to anoint Jesus's feet with.
Yeah.
So it's overly generous. It's overly hospitable. It's like outrageously so. It is an act of hospitality that's rooted and driven by love. And I think that's like the second thing. So if the first is that it's just really, it is an overly generous act of hosting in like just the strict kind of social human to human sense. It's that, if that's the first reason. I think the second reason is that really what we find out is that she is not welcoming Jesus into Simon's house as host so much as she's welcoming Jesus into all of her life for how he forgives and loves and how he's acted toward Jesus. So like some people suggest that this woman very likely would have met Jesus already and would have known Jesus, and maybe there's been some interaction there of forgiveness, or she's at least heard his message of forgiveness, that this might not be the first time they've met, but that she's internalized a lot of his teaching and really kind of wrestled out her own lifestyle and sin and come to a place of repentance, of life transformation. But I think what we know from this text is that she is really welcoming all of what Jesus brings: love, grace, mercy, forgiveness, and like change to her life, transformation to her life. Not just simply into like a physical house, but she's welcoming Jesus as one who enters into her life and radically changes it. And I think that's why we see her in tears. Like she's weeping, not just simply to I can use these tears to wash it. Like I think she's weeping because she's genuinely been confronted by the reality of who Jesus is, and has had her life altered because of the reality of who Jesus is, and is wrestling that out.
Yeah.
Like this is the expression of love and gratitude, thankfulness from one who knows full well how the world sees her, knows full well how, she's lived her life, whatever that is, like we're not told. And who also then knows full well how deep Jesus's love and forgiveness is for her.
Yeah.
And that's hit her. And so she's welcoming Jesus into her life in that sense.
Yeah.
Of host, right? So I think, it's lavish on a human standard, like kind of from a human perspective. And I think it's representative of the radical transformation that happens when Jesus gets a hold of somebody and transforms their life.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's cool. It's like just seeing her have that kind of raw honesty with herself of like understanding her brokenness, and like you're saying, like it's out of that place and understanding of like this is where the tears come from. Yeah, you know. And so I guess a follow-up question, more like application based, like how can we see this contrast? What does that tell us about how we approach Jesus today? Like either between like that formality versus the raw honesty that we see in the woman.
Yeah. This question would be easier to, I love this question. It'd be easier to answer, I think, if Simon had actually done each of those 3 tasks as host, but just in like this rote, because it's required of me kind of way, then we could say, well, listen, like you can see Simon's heart. He's doing it because it's the right thing to do, not because it's representative of anything inside of him. And here's this lady who shouldn't be the host, but who is doing it. Like she's hosting in just such a lavish, generous, loving way because it represents her heart. So it would have been so much easier, I think, to answer if Simon
he doesn't even do it.
Exactly. He doesn't even do it. And so I think that there is that hesitancy. I bring that up because I do think that we can tend to struggle with this raw, like unfiltered response to Jesus. Like I really do mean, like, I think on Sunday I said, like, how far back do you think the crowds got? Like the other people there, the other guests, like, did they leave? Like how awkward would they have felt watching all of this happen? And I do think that there's a natural human inclination toward like awkward, like keep it at an arm's length, don't make me feel too vulnerable kind of response. That like, if I can think the right thing and believe the right thing and then just start to do the right thing, great, like I'm in. But I do think we struggle with, no, I'm going to get real honest and confront like the deepest, darkest pieces of my life and my soul, my heart and my mind, and allow Jesus to meet me there and actually be transformed by Jesus's presence and love, death, resurrection, confrontation of sin with life and kingdom. Like, I do think we struggle with that honesty. And so I think that's why it matters that Simon didn't do the quote right thing in some way, because we can't even, like, it's not even like you could say, well, at least I could be like Simon and I can do the right thing for a good reason. It really is like, I think the gospel does force us to really wrestle with the most honest, raw, at times darkest, most hurt pieces of our life. And when we do, it's really in those moments that there is that deep level of healing that leads to this outpouring of like tears and love that this woman shows toward Jesus. So I think like we need people in our lives who are willing to press in and not allow, or at least challenge us when we try to tip toward that, like, what I'll say, like legalistic sort of, I'll do the right thing because it's the right thing. Like sometimes we just need to do that. Sometimes you do need to do the right thing just simply because it's the right thing. But, I think sometimes we can maybe use that to avoid really wrestling with what's going on in our lives. So the fact that we see Simon not offer these three, forms of welcome as host, does, I think, really show us that there's one way to respond to Jesus. And the right way to respond to Jesus is by allowing Jesus to actually confront and challenge and transform all of the pieces of our life.
Yeah.
So we don't get to compartmentalize it. We don't get to like wall off a piece. We're good at that, right? We don't get to keep like kind of hide these pieces back. Truly, like what God is challenging for each of us to do is to say, okay, all of it, whatever needs to go.
Yeah.
Game on.
Yeah.
I'm willing to deal with that. And I think that does happen when you got people in your life that are willing to like hold your feet to the fire, as it were. Really simple, like day-to-day analogy. You need somebody in your life who's like, hey, how's it going? Good. Like, how are you doing? Good. No. Okay. Like, how are you really doing?
Yeah.
It's that second question. Like, I don't believe you.
Yeah.
Right. And you need people who are willing to lean in like that. And that requires so much just presence and awareness and non-anxious, presence in somebody's life. So, like I think one of the challenges is to be that for one another, and to not keep things at that surface level, but really to like press into, okay, like what's Jesus actually transforming in your life? Yeah. We had that at the end. If people were at the community Bible study, and that's kind of where we landed with the community Bible study, is what are some of the things that Jesus is like convicting you on? Yeah. And I remember that conversation around the table being like, oh, this is it. Like these are so meaningful. Yeah. And it's so awkward at first. Like, who's going to go first? Yeah. And how honest will the first person be? And like, cause that's like,
sets the tone. Yeah.
Oh yeah. But I do think the more we can push away from certainly like the Simon the Pharisee and not having the conversations, mm-hmm. but even just doing the right thing, like having the surface level conversations, the more we can press into those deeper conversations, the better. And like, what that need, like you need people who you can trust and who've earned trust in your life. Like that only happens inside of real, meaningful, deep seated relationship, which is why at the end, I kind of brought us back around to community as mm-hmm. a final piece. So
cool. So Jesus says, whoever has been forgiven little loves little. How does that truth challenge the way we talk about grace and sin in modern church culture?
Yeah. I think we have a tendency to diminish sin, which might, like, people might hear that and be like, oh, I don't know how to handle that line. I think because we wrestle with like vulnerability, honesty, like we struggle with our own sin. We, as a community, what that can tend to look like is that we struggle talking about sin, period. Because I can't challenge you on your sin because I don't want you to challenge me on my sin. Right. Like that's kind of this, like, it's almost like, this is a like feels like a little bit like mutually assured destruction. Yeah. So it's like you got your sin, I got my sin, and I'm not going to challenge you on yours because I don't want you to lean in on mine. And we're like, anyway, so like let's just keep those pieces personal and private. I do think that like in Canada something shifted in it as a culture. Like, and I want to say, like, I wasn't there, but like, I want to say in the 70s, and I might be wrong on this, on these dates, where like we've relegated a lot of things to the personal, private sphere of like ethics in society. So, religion is one, and sex is another. And so I think it was Pierre Elliott Trudeau, when he was prime minister, who said that the state has no business in the bedroom of the nation. Right. Mm. So essentially what you do on your own private time is your own private thing, and no entity ought to, speak into that. Mm-hmm. And so I think we've done that in terms of a lot of different things in life where we just naturally, it's like, what are the things that you don't talk about on like a first date or with your in-laws or when families get together?
Yeah.
Are like religion, politics, and there's another one there. I can't remember what it is.
Yeah.
But like we've just kind of relegated a lot of these things to individual, private life, and they're either like taboo, like we don't talk about them in public. You know, I don't want to impinge on your thoughts, and you don't want to impinge on my thoughts. Like, let's just, talk about sports or the weather or whatever, like where we're going on vacation. And again, like we wrestle with having deep, meaningful conversation. And then you get somebody who's like, man, I struggle with small talk. And like, they only want to go like, to just like,
Yeah.
deep conversation. Like, okay, yeah, like more of that.
Yeah.
So I think that when Jesus says, whoever, and I want to read it. So, whoever has been forgiven much loves much is, essentially the line. But it's her sins, and they are many, have been forgiven. So she has shown me great love. I love that. So this is the NLT, the New Living Translation.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it's just so crystal clear. I tell you, her sins, and they are many, right?
Yeah.
Have been forgiven. So she has shown me much love. And it's the whole like mini parable that Jesus tells. One person owes, another 50. Third owes the same guy 500. The one dude, money lender, he forgives both the debts. And like, who's going to be more grateful?
Yeah.
And Simon answers, yeah, like obviously it's the one who owed more. It was going to take him longer to pay it off. He would have had to work harder to do it. Maybe he couldn't, like, for all of these reasons. And I think the point that Jesus is making here is not so much that this woman's sin is greater than like Simon's sin. So she, she's going to love me better than you. I think what he's saying is she really gets it. Like, she gets the depth of the need in her life.
Mm-hmm.
And Simon doesn't. He doesn't get the depth of the need. He thinks it's like 50, $50, when really it's 500.
Mm.
And I think what Jesus is saying is, no, like, this woman gets it. She has felt the devastation of sin and brokenness in her life, and she really actually understands how great it is to be forgiven from that.
Yeah.
And I think that, again, we struggle with this in, what I would consider like a fairly affluent life in Canada right now for many people. And like, for some, it's not. For some, it's very hard. Think about people who are just brand new to the country and who have left everything and are trying to reestablish their life in a new country. Maybe it's a new language. Like, you can still have a difficult experience here day to day for a whole variety of reasons. But I think by and large, for many people, our affluence means that we are dependent on another for very little, right?
Yeah.
Like, if you can go to the store and buy food when you're hungry, like, it's been a long time since I had to depend on someone else to provide food for me.
Yeah.
And like, that's a privileged place to sit. I need to be really grateful for that. But I think what it does is, like, our affluence makes us blind in some ways. Like, our physical wealth and accumulation of stuff, like not really having need, really makes it hard to wrestle out like spiritual need. Because like, I don't need anybody for anything.
Yeah.
And now we're like, oh no, but we do. You do.
Yeah.
And like, I do think we struggle with that. And so I think what Jesus is pointing out is like, the lady, this woman gets it. And she understands the depth of the need that she has for somebody else to come in and rescue. And that's why I love like C.S. Lewis's line that says, I think it's anyways, it's probably misquoted by a bunch of different people or like attributed to a bunch of different people. and so I might be misattributing it here, you know, but he said like, there's a line that says like, you know, if our deepest need as humanity were like economic prosperity or wealth, whatever, like God would have sent an economist, right?
Yeah.
And he goes through this whole list and he says, no, but like our deepest need was actually our sin and our brokenness, like the death and decay. And so God sent a rescuer, like one who is the one to lift us up out of, you know, a pit that we can't dig our way out of, or however you want to picture it.
Yeah.
So I think this line, it confronts us with the depth of our sin. And though it really reveals, and this is where like, I think it's positive in the end, it really reveals how great life and community and love can be once you've wrestled with how deeply loved and forgiven you are.
Yeah.
So our ability to love one another grows as we're willing to be confronted by how much we've been loved.
Yeah.
Our ability to forgive people grows. Our capacity to forgive grows when we really genuinely wrestle with how we've been forgiven. If we kind of like put off like, oh, like my sin's not that great, and I definitely didn't do this, or I definitely didn't do that, and if you diminish your sin, then you diminish the greatness or gravity of God's forgiveness. And I think that hinders your ability to forgive and to love and to continue to be generous with other people.
Yeah.
It certainly also, you know, limits your ability to really live and flourish the way God's created you to. So I think, again, like I think we need to confront the reality of sin with the promise and hope and expectation of like, yeah, this increases our ability to love and to love well and to love one another in ways that the church needs.
Yeah. 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 That's great. You kind of touched on this a little bit on like the idea of how maybe we avoid talking about sin, having those deep conversations, and maybe how we even like how we minimize sin, like the impact or the depth of sin in our life.
Yeah.
How do you think that affects how deeply we love Jesus and how readily we approach him?
Yeah, I picture like a friendship, or even like you take it a step further and think about like a relationship, a dating relationship, or a marriage. Let's say a marriage. And you know, I think we would all likely agree that the fewer secrets you're trying to keep from your spouse, the better off life is going to be.
Yeah.
Right. And, you know, I just think that when we diminish sin, when we, you know, whether it's out of like our own trying to, you know, preserve something in ourselves, or, you know, when we wall something off, like that, you can't live like an unhindered relationship out when you're like just constantly trying to navigate this piece over here.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of like that's what we do in some measure with God is, you know, what we're effectively saying is, God, you can have 98% of my life, but I need to keep this thing over here for me because it makes me feel good. Maybe because I enjoy it. Maybe because it makes me feel safe. Maybe because it's like the thing that in season of trauma was a coping mechanism, and, you know, that's like safety net, whatever it is. Like, I think that level of like walling off pieces of our life or compartmentalization just means that it's constantly there as you're trying to live out, you know, a loving and life-giving relationship with Jesus.
Yeah.
So again, I go back to like a marriage where you got something kind of like, I don't want you to find this piece out, or, I don't want you to know this thing about me. Like maybe it's a wound, maybe it's like a trauma, maybe it's like a history thing. And you're like, if you knew this about me, so like, it's not, it's not something that you're doing, but it's something that you believe you are.
Yeah.
You're like, if you find this out about me, then certainly you won't love me. Right. So like that, I think that's another thing that can come into relationships. Again, like you're just always dealing with that thing and always tiptoeing around not dealing with it.
Yeah.
Right. Keeping it to yourself, or not allowing the pieces of you out that ought to be. Right. And I think that, this is again where this is the C.S. Lewis quote at the end of my sermon. I think I said, like, when we learn, or when we really realize, like, God has forgiven the inexcusable in us, then we learn to forgive the inexcusable in others.
Yeah.
And so again, I think you asked about our capacity to love Jesus. I think it's hard to love somebody fully. It's hard for a relationship to be fully formed when you're constantly holding something back. And maybe, like, so I'll name another thing. Maybe it's work, right? Like maybe it's I'm going to let you shape every single decision I make, except in, like, when I'm at work, like that's my arena.
Yeah.
Because you're like, I'm going to have to make some unethical decisions, and I'm going to have to make some decisions that I know I wouldn't likely be comfortable making if I allow the gospel into that area of my life. And again, it's impossible to love somebody fully. It's impossible to be fully loved, right? When you're trying to hide something, or when you're trying to hold something back, or when you're trying to say, like, this piece is mine, only I get to input on it. You not only are you not able to love fully, but you're not fully known. You're not fully loved. You are not, like, Peter Scazzero has this series called The Emotionally Healthy. I think right now the iteration is Emotionally Healthy Discipleship. But he wrote, like, Emotionally Healthy Church, Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, Emotionally Healthy Discipleship, which I'm struggling to say, like, all those things.
Yeah.
But, the premise of it is that you can't be spiritually healthy and developed while being emotionally stunted.
Yeah.
And so for a long time, we've done discipleship and, like, Christian formation as this, let's get you spiritually as formed as possible. And, like, how much can you know and internalize, memorize, remember, like, but we're going to not focus on, like, the emotional health piece.
Yeah.
And so here comes Peter Scazzero, and, what they've written is, I think it's really shaped my understanding of spiritual formation, because they challenge it. They say, no, at the end of the day, you won't be spiritually formed if you're not also being emotionally shaped and formed. So you've got to deal with, like, the emotional stuff as you wrestle out the spiritual stuff.
Yeah.
And the spiritual stuff wants to deal with the emotional stuff and wants to, inform it as you wrestle it out. But you can't remain emotionally a child while expecting to be spiritually mature.
Yeah.
And in the other way, he says, like, you're probably not going to be emotionally mature until you're also spiritually mature. Like, they go hand in hand.
Yeah.
So, Jesus doesn't just want to save you to heaven when you die, like, spiritually save you. He actually wants to get in and transform all of your life, emotions, the way you think, act, how you are, all of it. And when we wall off those pieces, or keep those pieces maybe at an arm's length, that's what you're preventing.
Yeah.
Right? Is for the gospel to shape, for Jesus' love to shape all of who you are, and to wrestle out the hardest parts of your life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Cool.
I don't know. Does that answer?
Yeah.
Get at answering it? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Now, we see Simon judging the woman based on her past, like based on her sins. But then we get that contrast with Jesus, who honors her and sees her for her present faith that she's showing.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we keep ourselves from putting others in boxes based on who they were as opposed to the person that they are becoming?
Yeah. Really, like, carefully, slowly. I don't have a perfect answer for this question. I don't have perfect answers for any questions, but I think this is where, in my mind, this is where, again, the turn to community is necessary. Because, like, I know, we all know, like, our own hearts toward judgment, like, for whatever reason that is. I think sometimes we wrestle with, like, God's love and grace and community bringing us into relationship with people that maybe we don't like, or, that we don't think we're going to like, or that we don't, want, maybe necessarily, like, people who are different than us in ways that go, like, I don't know how to talk to you. Right. Like, I mean, those are kind of surfacey level things, but, like, each of us, I think, know where we're prone to judgment and why we're prone to judgment. I think that one of the main ways we can help combat that is by embracing community, because it's in community where, I need people to say to me, hey, like, not sure that approach is the right approach.
Yeah.
Or not sure that you're seeing this correctly, right? Not sure that you are reading what's currently happening. And it seems, it feels, looks like we're doing this whole, like, you're still over here, like, judgment thing, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's a culture thing that happens inside a community where we learn to be accountable with one another and name the fact that, yep, probably still going to be prone towards judgment. And also name the fact that, yep, I'm going to need somebody to help correct that in me. And when it happens, having these relationships that we've built that do allow for it and that do call things out. So, if in a group something is said, that's like, hey, that lands, that sounds like judgment.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what I'm not saying is that, like, I'm not saying we can't be judging, right? I think that so we can tip toward hyper or, like, exceptional judgment on the one hand, like Simon does. I think, there could have been a different way for Simon to, like, approach the same, like, not like, does Jesus know what he's doing? But I wonder what he's doing.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because very clear, like, nobody would disagree. Like, Simon and this woman are different.
Yeah.
Now, the reality is they're both sinful and they both need Jesus to the same degree.
Yeah.
That's the reality here, right? Is that it doesn't matter, like, how close to perfect your life is or isn't.
Yeah.
Like, we all need, in equal measure, Jesus to repair a relationship that's broken.
Yeah.
And there are lots of ways of talking about sin and salvation, but Simon, he goes, like, does Jesus know what he's doing? Like, if he did, surely he wouldn't. Like, it's not only is it judgment, but, like, it's immediate condemnation. And so I think we distinguish as we work through the Sermon on the Plain, where Jesus says, stop judging, stop condemning. We work through the reality that those are actually different. There's a finality to condemnation that there isn't in judgment or in judging necessarily. And we need to learn to forgive and give extra measures of grace to kind of combat and push against the judge and condemn. I think it's that, like, Simon's he's like judge, jury, executioner all in one fell swoop in this. Yeah. It's not like, does Jesus know who she is? Like, does he realize what's going on? It's if he knew, so he's already made the determination that Jesus doesn't know.
Yeah.
and that he's not a prophet, that he's not, Messiah, he's not who he says he is. So it's not that he's just judging, it's that he's condemned.
Yeah.
He's condemned Jesus, and he's condemned this woman, and there's no good that's going to happen here. I think alternatively, like Simon, I'm like, dude, like just remain a little bit curious, like even 1% curious about what, like, I wonder what Jesus is doing. This is not normal.
Yeah.
This is not what we all expected. I wonder what he's doing. It's just a different posture to take than, well, that dude, surely he's not a prophet, can't be. So it's the fact that he's judged, he's condemned, he's walked away from the whole thing already. Mm-hmm. So, I think for us, it's how do we remain open to what Jesus is doing? Yeah. I wonder what Jesus is doing. So like somebody walks in to the church, you're like, I never thought you were going to be here. Like, hey, like that's probably worth celebrating. Right? I wonder what Jesus is doing. Never expected you to show up. I wonder what Jesus must be up to something. Yeah. I think that's a different posture to take, and it's one that pushes against judgment. And so remain curious and open to what God's doing, and worry less about what the individual's doing. Yeah. And kind of like, I can sit here and go, man, I wonder what you're doing. If you thought this thing through, like, no, I wonder what Jesus is doing in the midst of this. Yeah. So, community that's going to hold you accountable, and then remain open and curious to what God's doing.
That's really cool.
They're not going to get you all the way there, but at least it's a start.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. Cool. Awesome. So last question.
Okay.
Jesus says, your faith has saved you. Go in peace.
Yeah.
So I guess kind of two mini questions. First, what does it mean to be saved in this context? Mm-hmm. And then follow up on that, what prompted you, and you've touched on this a little bit, but what prompted you to kind of discuss the need for community at the end of the sermon? Yeah. In the go in peace section.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Two questions. So the first one, okay. Saved in this sense. I've been wanting to talk about this, and so maybe I have already talked about this, and so forgive me, listeners, if like I'm repeating myself. It's probably worth repeating though. So we think of saved as, I think at least we tend to think about when we read that word, like go in faith, or your faith is saved, you go in peace, as like spiritual salvation, like, moment of conversion, was living in sin, has encountered Jesus, is now turned from sin and living in faith. So we're talking about, lifestyle that was leading toward condemnation and hell, destruction, those pieces away from God, and now a life that's turned and leading toward, among other things, like heaven, right? We think of salvation as, well, you want to go to heaven when you die, right? So what do you need to do in order to be saved? In order to be saved from something toward something, saved from sin toward life, saved from hell toward heaven, saved from and it misses a lot of what that word holds. So yes, it's spiritual salvation. Yes, it is spiritual redemption, and like it is and has to do with the destruction of sin and death, and toward life and forgiveness and heaven. But it actually, that word that we translate saved is the same word that we also translate as healed. So very often in the New Testament, when Jesus goes around and he heals somebody, so, he casts out a demon and heals this person, or he, says to the paralytic, like, get up and walk. And we read like he was healed. It's that same word. I think the root there is sozo, but it means to save, and it also means to heal.
Yeah.
And you could interchange those English words in these narratives. So we should never read saved as strictly spiritual. in the New Testament, because like that, again, to even say that straight, like we don't have time to talk about this, but like this dualism between mind and body, or body and like spirit, is not Christian.
Yeah.
Like it's not Christian to say that like your body is just going to die and decay so that your soul or your spirit can go to heaven when you die. Like that, like you are a created human being, body, like mind and spirit.
Yeah.
And like some people's, we want to talk about a soul, and, again, Christian philosophers and theologians debate about like whether we should talk about spirit or soul. And regardless, like when God creates humanity, he creates a physical body that is good. Like there's something that is like intimately human about being infleshed. And when we talk about the resurrection, we're talking about new heaven, new earth, like new physical, like resurrected bodies. So it's the early churches had like names for all of it. Like literally, it is literally a heresy that the early church debated over, about, this creep of Platonic dualism, and like this philosophy that says, no, like we need to escape our bodies and release, our spirits to the fullness of what they ought to be.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that still creeps into like contemporary Christianity and theology and philosophy. Like how we talk is like a lot of it contains kind of these roots in this dualism where, we think inherently, the flesh, like my body's bad, my spirit, that's what's good, and that's what's going to live forever. And so I got to focus on that. Like Jesus isn't talking about this like spiritual salvation that happens absent from the body. He's talking about the whole self being healed, and being restored and being remade the way it was intended to be. And that includes spirit, and includes mind, it includes body, it includes soul, if you want to throw that in there as well. Like the whole person is meant to be recreated into the image of Jesus. And, we know that takes a long time. It's a process. So when he says to this woman, go in peace, your faith has saved you. It's meant to contain so much more than just your faith has spiritually saved you so that when you die, you go to heaven.
Yeah.
He's saying, no, actually, your faith is restoring you to life, like all of who you are.
Yeah.
Spirit, mind, body, your entire life is being reordered by Jesus, and by life inside the kingdom, and it's faith that in large part enables it. The faith of Jesus and the faith of this person, just like it is for us.
Yeah.
The faith of Jesus and the faith of this person, whoever you may be. It's you were meant to, and like listener, each of us were meant to find healing in a relationship with Jesus.
Yeah.
And so, and like it's not just like you don't just forget the pieces of brokenness. Like, no, actually, those are the things that God wants to deal with in a way that does heal. So your faith has saved you. It's this holistic picture of what it means to be healed. Hebrew word shalom is a really good place to start, right? For those who've been around when we've talked about it, and others who have preached, like we talk about this idea of shalom and peace and wholeness and health and restoration. Like this is all of the goodness of like the way life was meant to be. And so your faith has saved you. Like I said, like it's that full picture. Go in peace then is connected to, which is the second part of your question. Go in peace is connected to that healing, to that salvation. So for Jesus to say go in peace continues that holistic redemptive work that Jesus accomplishes in our lives, which is again not just individual spiritual sin and salvation. It is holistic life being reordered around what is truly life-giving and healthy for a human being. So for me, that means necessarily community.
Yeah.
Because I know that I can't, like, I'm not going to be the best version of myself in isolation. right? Like individual faith, like that doesn't, lead me into the best version of myself, even as a Christian, like individual spirituality, individual, theology, whatever it is. Like none of that is the best version of itself in isolation. So I think there's an individual way to talk about peace and salvation and healing, and there needs to be, but I think it necessarily leads toward the health and healing, wholeness, peace, restoration of a community.
Yeah.
And I do think that we've lost some of that as a default. Like I think the people of Israel, like by default, and maybe I'm reading too much into it, but like by default had these ways of talking about corporate sin and corporate, the need for corporate repentance, and then corporate forgiveness and reconciliation. Like as a people toward God, there was sin and there was redemption, and this back and forth. And we've taken it and made it just very individual, when I think it was always meant to be lived out in community. So, you and I need community to be who God is creating us to be, and we know it. And also I think we just need to talk about the fact that salvation never meant to just be strictly individual.
Yeah.
It was always meant to be in a community. And wholeness, health, healing, all of that is it's meant to be lived in community. Again, so peace, the Greek word for peace, one of its roots actually means to like, and I don't have it in front of me, so I'm not going to remember exactly. But to mend into a whole is what one of the root words means. Yeah. So to have peace with one another is to like bind up and mend back together into what is whole. So it's not just like, peace isn't just like the cessation of conflict, go your separate ways. Peace is mending, binding back together what is broken into a whole. Yeah. So for Jesus to say, go in peace, that's why I think like it screams, and this, admittedly, like I didn't create that. Like I didn't come up with that point. Fred Craddock, who wrote a great commentary on the Gospel of Luke, preacher in the States, pastor, he's it's a question that he asks in his commentary, like, where does one go when one is told to go in peace by Jesus? Yeah. And really the answer to that question, I think, is community, because of what peace really ought to look like. Yeah. Again, it's not just individual, like, oh, I feel better about my life. It's mending back together into a whole. Yeah. What was disintegrated and broken. So that's where I think we get to community. Salvation, like saved, healing, health, wholeness, peace, mending, binding, wholeness, again, taking individual pieces and binding them together into a whole. In my mind, necessarily lands us in community. Cool. Yeah. Cool. Amazing.
Yeah. Well, that's all.
Hey, thank you. Thanks, Chris, for being here. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Yeah, it's great to kind of go back and forth on some of this. And friends, we hope that this encourages you wherever you are into your week. We want you to find yourself in community. So we're hoping and praying that you can wrestle out some of these questions yourself, with friends, with family, inside of relationship. And that in some measure, hey, I do pray that it bring you peace and health and mending, binding back together of what maybe feels like fragmented and a little bit too individual sometimes. So blessings on your week. We're praying for you, and we'll see you in the next episode.